Thank you, Chair, Minister, ladies and gentlemen. Well, as the Chair said, after 35 years in the Irish higher education system, I am leaving it. I've been one of those frontline workers in the higher education system. I've lectured at every level, 350 students in first year in Theatre M, second year, third year, Masters, PhD students. I've done it in Ireland and I've done it in many other countries. I've delivered full courses to four of the 7 Irish universities. So I regard for most of my career, I've spent my time doing what an academic does, which is doing research, writing and lecturing. I also had the great good fortune that the new president of UCD in 2005, Hugh Brady, asked to meet me one day and he said, "Brigid, would you ever consider doing something else?" And I said, "Well, Hugh, I love my job, I love my students, I don't want to do anything else." And he said, "I want you to take 24 hours to think about, would you become a principal of the College of Human Sciences? I'm about to rattle this institution. I'm about to engage in a major reform process." And since I was both, always in terms of my academic work, interested in change and reform and organisations, I thought, well, you get one chance to do this, why not? So for 6 years, I was a vice president in UCD and I did do that heavy lifting. So I saw the world from the school, the department, but also the world from a senior management group, which is very tough, because one of the things I learned is that academics, we tend to look down. We see the world very much from the perspective of our discipline or where we are in the institution. And we're not even all that knowledgeable about what goes on across our complex institutions. And I was very struck by how enriching it was and valuable it was to work right across the university with all of the other disciplines. I learned so much. In thinking about higher education today, and most of my talk, in fact, is on higher education, I think the single biggest change in my life as an academic over 35 years has been the intensification of internationalisation of the academy. The academy, through history, has always been internationalised. Scholarship knows no borders, knowledge knows no boundaries. But the intensification of the internationalisation of the world we live in is truly one of the most significant changes. When I started my career at the end of the 1970s, there were 2 academic meetings outside Ireland that I would consider going to every year. But now there's just so many cross-national research projects and meetings of all sorts, interdisciplinary and disciplinary, all of the time. And I think when one thinks about the kind of academic one has to hire today, then one wants to have a look at their email box. One wants to know that they are networked within and beyond their own discipline, that they are networked in Europe and beyond internationally. And thus, when we think about Ireland's higher education system, we must be aware that higher education in particular is both a driver but also subject to the processes of globalisation. And that alone, we can't think of our system in isolation. We can't think that the Irish higher education system or even its education system can somehow be contained in a container. The topic today, building the best education system in the world, that's clearly an admirable goal. It's certainly an admirable goal for a country that I would regard in recovery and intent on rebuilding its reputation. It's an admirable goal for a country that has always historically valued education. But are we really kidding ourselves? The best in the world? We saw the resources. We don't invest the kinds of resources that would come anywhere close to making our system the best in the world. We must also be mindful of the fact that right across the world, governments are now investing very heavily in their educational systems, particularly in higher education and in research. They're doing so in order to differentiate themselves, to look for comparative advantage. They're trying to ensure that in the world, a rapidly changing world with an acceleration of both the creation and transmission of knowledge, that they are there. One country after another in Europe has launched excellence initiatives, and they're investing enormous amounts of money in those excellence initiatives, and we must be aware of that. Our Minister, in May of this year, in a letter to the HEA, set out the 7 objectives for the Irish higher education system. Reference was made to world-class, excellence in teaching and learning, open and excellent research system, global competitiveness, and internationally oriented. This is the language that should be and would be in a letter from any Minister for Education in any country in the world today. Everyone is aiming to be better, to ratchet up, to hang in. So, competition and internationalisation, those are the world that Irish higher education will have to cope with. In terms of looking at our system today, what can we say? And here I'm not going to say very much other than one indicator of what I would call utter failure in our education system and one indicator of some success. An indicator of utter failure, and that is the fact that we have double the EU average of young people between 15 and 17 who are neither in education nor training. Double the EU average. So if in, for example, the EU average is about 3.2%, ours is 6.5%. Throughout the 2000s, when we were a country of plenty, when resources were not a problem like they are today, we still had double the EU average of young people who were neither in education nor training. The Danish figure, at or under 2%. The Dutch, at or under 1%. The UK, 3 to 4%. Ours is over 6% and was estimated to be 7% last year. Now, we know, and we should know, because all of the evidence is there, that if young people leave our educational system with no qualifications, without basic literacy and numeracy, that is one of the most strongest red lights that you can have for the problems you will have in social policy, for the problems you will have in terms of welfare dependency, for lives lost over a long time. And yet we accepted to have double the EU average, just like we accepted to have double the EU average of jobless households in this country, even in times of plenty. We're not very good in this society at tackling tough problems. We just don't like to confront them. We don't like to disturb and rattle the system and say, we need to do something, and not just strategy and plans, but actually get down, get dirty, and start to solve them. So that's one evidence of what I would call abject failure. Success. This country has managed an extraordinary expansion of its participation rates in higher education. When I went to university in the early 1970s, 2% of my cohort went to university. Right through the decades, increased to 25% in the 80s, 44% by the 1990s, 50% in the early 2000s, and now it's well over 60%. And we know that the proportion of young people, 25 to 34, with a third level degree in 2010, Ireland was at the top of the EU rankings. So how is it that as a society we can be at the top of one important indicator in terms of participation rates, and yet at the bottom in terms of others? And that, I think, is a feature of both our society and our system of public policy. We can be best in class and worst in class, and we don't seem to be able to make the system systemically of high quality. So, as I leave Irish higher education, and I leave it with a lot of regret because I felt extraordinarily privileged to work in a university, I will never, ever lose the excitement that it takes getting off the 46A and walking into Belfield every September. The sheer, not just the new students coming in, it is a great privilege. It keeps you young if most of your life is spent with young people. So I leave it with a lot of regret. So what do I think would make a difference? And I'm not going to talk about rankings, and I'm not going to talk about resources, and I'm not, in fact, even going to talk about the digital education, and this is really important. I'm going to talk about three things. One, a focus on excellence and quality. 2, differentiation, and 3, strip back all the jargon and concentrate on the essentials. So firstly, the focus on excellence and quality. The Irish system of higher education from the 1990s onwards did engage with quality processes. Every department, every academic unit, every faculty undertakes and goes through these periodic quality reviews, self-assessment reports, feedback, quality improvement processes. Some academic units themselves engage in constant review of their research capacity and output. But our higher education institutes, including our universities, are patchy. We have some in all of our universities, outstanding departments and schools. We have some and many outstanding scholars, but again, the quality is not uniform. So aspiring to be the best in the 21st century requires a focus and a relentless focus on quality and excellence, not just on islands of excellence. And it requires, again, in my view, a change in how the life of the individual academic progresses. There is no serious assessment of the performance of individual academics other than through our promotions processes. And our promotions processes right across our universities are now much more rigorous and much tougher and much better than they were 10 years ago. But an early career scholar achieves permanency and tenure relatively easily, and their subsequent performance owes almost everything to self-motivation, ambition, the passion for their subject, and the academic culture that surrounds them. If a scholar, for whatever reason, is not research active or barely active, there's very little that can be done in the Irish system. We were given something called PMDS, an offshoot of benchmarking. It's entirely unsuited to academic life and to academic staff. Every time a university hires an early career scholar or a professor, but particularly an early career scholar, they're making an investment of probably around €1 million. It is that serious an investment. And so one of the key roles of any academic leader is to hire quality scholars. And if none are available, don't hire at all. Never satisfies. And there is awful pressure to satisfy. People around the table think, oh God, we've this course to do in September, who's going to take it? Let's hire. You can't. If you hire the wrong person in the Irish system, you most likely have them for life. So I think we need to expect an awful lot of the senior people in our universities and the professoriate, that they are ruthless about the quality of their hires. Satisfying, as I said, is not good enough. Without quality academics throughout our system, and every system needs some stars. We need people that we can look up to who are not just good academics and very good academics, but are of a different quality. And we need some of those. But the difficulty in Ireland is that we don't have the rigour, or some would say the brutality of the US tenure system, or the periodic reviews, the research assessment exercise, or the RIF that they have in the United Kingdom. Good academics and outstanding academics have options. They can move, and they do move. They're mobile. But a poor hire is with you for life. So if we're serious about the quality of our higher education system, in my view, we need a far more robust tenure system, and we need the opportunity to transfer research inactive staff to teaching-only contracts. And that's tough, and it's not easy, and I imagine that all of the unions in the Irish higher education system would scream, but academics make judgments all of the time. We get an article to review for a journal, we make a judgment. We get an essay from a student, we make a judgment. We must be willing to accept to be judged ourselves, because we're in the judgment game. We're hardwired to do it. It's what we do all of the time. I also think that academic leadership makes a big difference within individual departments and individual units. A good academic unit shines. You know it's good. Even if it's not your discipline, even if it's far distant from your discipline, you know it's good. You know that the academics know what they're good at. You know that they can communicate this to the academy and to their own students, and that they are committed to high standards. And again, probably one of the best tests of frontier research in Europe at the moment are the ERC grants, the European Research Council grants. The UK is beating every country in Europe blind on ERC grants in every category. And it's not for no reason, because the British did engage with a process, and a tough process, of assessing quality in research in their universities for a very long time. So without a commitment, not just at a rhetorical level, to quality and excellence, but to actually do it day to day, week to week, year to year, then all of the rhetoric about best in the world and world class is meaningless. It won't happen. The second issue I'd like to address is differentiation. We now have 7 universities, 14 institutions of technology, and we're about to have some IoTs over whatever time period transformed into technological universities. So, and there's a lot of talk about clustering. Now, I just want to show you some indicators of research intensity. I think we need to stand back, and I'm not into the bashing of the IoTs. They were created for a purpose. They do a very good job at level 6, 7 and 8. But look at those figures. 93% of all doctoral students in the country are in the 7 universities. 98% of research expenditure in 10-11 was in the universities. 84% of all contract research staff in the universities. And in terms of signed research contracts and grants, 99%. Now, we need to take those stats really seriously. And as we set out the criteria, and it has been set out for the development of technological universities, we have to be extremely careful in designating institutions as universities unless they meet really high standards. And I must say that everything I know about Irish public policy and everything I know about the localism and the pressures and the sliding makes me really worried about how this will pan out over the next 10 years. There's also a very sharp contrast in academic credentials of staff between the IoTs and the universities. In our IoTs at the moment, 24% of the staff have PhDs. Now, that is the entry requirement. I would not shortlist a young academic for an interview without a PhD, a postdoc, and some publications. That is the standard that is now required to be a good academic in a university, internationally. So the idea that somehow or other, that even by getting 40% or 50% of the staff with PhDs, that somehow or other solves the question of the credentials, the academic credentials, I wonder. And then, of course, we have no formal differentiation in our university system. I know that there was an extraordinary reaction when UCD and TCD launched the Innovation Alliance. Was this an attempt by these 2 institutions to our other created tier system? Were they trying to get ahead of the pack? What were they up to? In other words, again, but if you look at the data, there is a very significant difference in the research intensity of our different universities in different subjects. And again, we must, as a society and as a public policy system, be able to say this. It shouldn't be, oh, can't go there. Might ruffle some feathers. Well, some feathers may need ruffling. And I have to say that I personally would go much more on further on the landscape. I would create confederal arrangements. Dublin has the largest intensity of higher education institutes in the country. And I would create a confederal University of Dublin. And I would make Dublin a global leader in education. But that, again, requires ruffling. It requires ruffling feathers, and we're not good at that. And finally, strip back and focus on the essentials. Education, like most aspects of life, is subject to fad and to fashion. And I have to say that I despair sometimes at the jargon and the language that surrounds what we do. We're now asked to identify learning outcomes, our student experience. Something called teaching and learning has taken over our universities. I really resist the use of the word teaching in a university. Our job is not to teach. Our job is to ensure that our students become self-motivated learners rather than that I teach them what they should know. The ambition must be that our graduates leave our universities and higher education institutes with deep substantive knowledge, a strong analytical capacity, an ability and a willingness to challenge received truths. And we must ask ourselves, have we done enough to embed critical thinking in our programme design, in our assessment and in our delivery? Our education system has many strengths, but training for critical thinking is not one of them. And we need to allow for discordant voices. We need to allow for new and different kinds of knowledge. And what we must do as a lecturer is to get our students hooked, to awaken in them the interest and the passion for a subject, to stretch them, to get them intellectually engaged. That's our role. Forget the jargon. That's what we should do. So, just to finish very briefly, I would strip it all back to three things. Hire the very best scholars, bite the bullet on tenure and periodic review. In the transition to technological universities, make sure those key metrics are tough and that we're prepared to say no. And finally, watch the jargon and never forget what Brian McMahon, my fellow Kerryman, said of educators. He said, above all, an educator needs an infectious enthusiasm allied to knowledge in the widest sense. No jargon on pedagogy. Nothing will ever replace someone who really is committed to educate. That infectious enthusiasm that Brian McMahon left on generations in Listowel can't be substituted for. So again, I think as educators, we need to retain the excitement, we need to retain the sense of wonder, and we need to retain our commitment to, and be humble about how much we can do. In a sense, our students should also learn as much from each other as they ever do from the formal part of their educational system. Thank you.